Menace and Strife. It was dusk when I got back to the hut. Joseph had just arrived with a pot, a sort of covered bucket of stew. His face showed a very worried look. "Richard, I have to tell you that when I got here, not 5 minutes ago, the lock was smashed and someone has gone through our things." "Has much been stolen?" "I think not, but you had better check." There was much chaos of my things. The half of the pencils and paper I did not take with me were strewn about, and each pencil broken in two. Well, I could use the stubs. I gathered up the paper. Most of it was a bit soiled, but still usable. Our clothes were on the floor, and we picked them up. "Joseph, I do not think anything is missing, but I keep all my important personal belongings with me in my knapsack or pockets." "Is anything of yours missing or damaged?" "Nothing missing, but some buttons off my shirt. Someone cut them all off, and they are not here. It looks like this has been done to annoy us, but possibly to find out if we were carrying any particular instructions. Like you, I keep anything important with me." 20. For the shirt, I have some buttons and a needle and thread in my knapsack. But who is the likely culprit, Joseph? Wandering thieves? I think if they were thieves, we would have nothing here. I am inclined to think it is someone who does not want anyone interfering with their business. Who might that be, I asked. My immediate thoughts are Sean O'Reilly. There have been rumors that men who he engages have to pay him a tenth of their pay or they lose their job. There is discontent, and there are other things going on that Mr. Kiefer does not like, besides the breakdowns of the steam crane. What other things? It is thought there may be theft of materials, such as spikes or fuel. The tools are on an inventory. Men are charged if a tool is lost. If one breaks, it has to be exchanged for a new one. Surely spikes are easy to check? But it would be easy to lose a few boxes, then sell them to the company again if one had an accomplice in the right place. We can, at the very least, estimate the losses. We can know the extent of loss easily by subtracting the number of spikes used from the number the train brings up. "Well, I have the numbers delivered in my knapsack," Joseph said. "I do not have the exact length of progress, but we can estimate it, divide by the distance between ties, and multiply by 4, 2 spikes per rail per tie." We had been eating the stew with bread, and Joseph had a kettle going on a small fire. We lit the lamp and had tea, and he took out the delivery numbers. Very soon we had an estimate that about a fifth of the spikes were being lost somewhere. "I think Kiefer should be informed," I said. "Bellisel will come up with another train, probably not tomorrow, but on the next day. If you write a note, he will take it to Kiefer, but it will not be by the special arrangement." "Can Bellisel be trusted?" "Yes. He has no fondness for O'Reilly, and he has said to me he suspects some theft, and that reflects badly on him, since he runs the depot. I can ask him to put a note in Kiefer's hand and not trust any intermediary." 30. In the morning, which was Saturday, we found materials to fix the door where it had been forced. O'Reilly seemed to grin at us as we made these crude repairs, which delayed our getting busy for the day. Joseph was going to walk back along the completed track, nominally to deliver a letter to someone in the town of Cornwall, but actually to visually inspect the completed track. And he told me to telegraph Kiefer a message important, calculations from Carr with Bellisel, so that Kiefer would be watching for my short report. In case Bellisel were on today's supply train, rather than that of Monday, which he had said he planned to ride, Joseph had my note with the estimates of missing spikes. Today, I would first examine the steam winch, which was fitted up with a derrick to make a crane. The boiler had been repaired, and it had been brought up by a small shunting engine from Cornwall, where it had been on a siding while being repaired. The man in charge of the crane was Angus MacDonald, and I fully expected a strong Scots accent, but it turned out he had been born and grown up in Canada. He seemed happy to show me the crane. Apparently Bellisel had told him one of my duties would be to suggest ways to keep this engine functioning. I could see the general design of the crane. Actually, it was a steam winch with 2 windlasses and gears that could engage each of them one at a time. There were brakes on each of the windlasses to hold them fixed if the engine were not working that particular windlass, or if the steam pressure were insufficient to hold the load. The engine was a single cylinder, but double acting. That is, the steam entered at one end and pushed the piston one way, then entered the other end and pushed it back. There was a flywheel that turned a small gear, which turned a bigger gear, which turned another small gear that was on a pivot so it could be moved to engage a large gear on one or the other of the windlass axles, that is, the ones with the ropes on them. I asked, "Is that squared end of the flywheel axle so you can put on a crank to manually turn the winches?" "Yes, and we need to do it far too often lately," McDonald replied. "Is the engine not powerful enough?" "Oh, the engine is powerful enough, but the boiler does not seem to take the pressure needed to drive it. And there is no pressure gauge either," I commented. "No, just the safety valve." As McDonald said this, I noticed that the safety valve had a rather larger weight ball on it than I would expect. 30. Let me explain how this worked. The valve was essentially a pipe that came out of the boiler, then bent at right angles to turn upward. Into the open top of this pipe, a simple stopper kept the steam from escaping. The stopper was held down with a rod that hinged a short way along a bar that was itself hinged to the side of the boiler. At the end of the bar was a ball that provided weight that held the bar down and hence the stopper in place. That is, until the pressure inside the boiler lifted the stopper. This sort of safety valve was pretty common and at first sight looked very ordinary. Essentially, a lever held the stopper in place until the force of the steam overcame the weight holding the stopper down. Sometimes a small sliding weight could be moved along the horizontal bar towards or away from the fixed ball. That would let you do a crude measurement of the pressure since you could adjust the force on the stopper. But when I made a closer examination, I could see the ball weight had been modified. It had extra material put on it, probably plumber's lead, then painted. No, been like that since I took over a couple of months ago. The last feller he got scalded when the seam broke here. He pointed to a seam in the vertical boiler. I asked carefully, "So you do not think that the ball has had metal added, then been painted?" McDonald looked at the ball from several angles, then said, "Now you have me look. I think you may be right, in which case we are running at a good deal more pressure than we should." No wonder she has been breaking. The boiler was being heated, so there was an increasing danger if we were correct in our observations. Can I suggest we lift the safety valve and put a piece of wire between the stopper and the seat to let it bleed off? Then remove as much of the fire as we can from the boiler. Then take a look at the weight. The crew will not be happy, but I will go along with that. I attached a piece of thin wire to a broomstick bent so it could be put down the safety valve pipe while McDonald lifted the ball with a stick. There was a lot of hissing noise and much steam, and the wire kept being blown out of the pipe until the pressure dropped, but eventually we got it in place. Then we quickly shoveled coals out into a wheelbarrow I had wetted with a bucket of water and threw more water on top when we had the firebox more or less empty. We got some more coals out through the ash bucket under the firebox. 32. We were then able to unscrew the weight ball, which was held on with a simple machine screw through it into the horizontal bar. McDonald pulled out a sheath knife. I had one too, thanks to Joseph and was able to cut into the ball easily. "You are right, Mr. Carr. Lead." He was about to cut it away, but I said, "Let's weigh it first. I want to work out the pressure at which that valve would have released." It was a pity we didn't have a scale or steelyard, but with a stick and some string we made a sort of balance, with a bucket on each side so it was level. Then we put the ball in one bucket, and McDonald held the balance string while I poured water in the other until we got the bucket with the ball to lift. We took a quart beer bottle and found that we filled it about 5.5 times. The ball weighed about 14 pounds. The safety valve pipe was 1 1/4 inches in diameter. The hinged bar was 18 inches to the center of the weight ball, but the hinge to the stopper rod was just 3 inches from where the bar was hinged on the boiler. Like I did, you can work out that the area of the safety valve pipe was a little less than 1 1/4 square inches. The hinged valve bar had a 6-to-1 ratio, so there was about 85 pounds force on the stopper, or about 69 pounds per square inch pressure to lift it. This was well over the 50 pounds per square inch, which was the maximum. In fact, The valve was supposed to pop up at 45 pounds per square inch. Taking a few more minutes, I worked out that the ball, if all iron, would be about 4 3/8 inches in diameter. Indeed, when McDonald cut off the lead, it was about that, and we put it back on after putting grease on its surface to stop it rusting. But do you think it will do the job, mister? Car question mark. Perhaps the engine isn't strong enough. We can only try it and see. If it is not strong enough, we could perhaps change the gearing, because I cannot see finding a stronger boiler, and a bigger cylinder or an additional one would be difficult to both find and fit. However, I think the easiest solution, until we can get a more powerful engine, is to add some pulley blocks. But we should work out what the maximum load will be. We do not want the crane tipping over. It shouldn't be too much of a problem today. We are just moving gravel for ballast, so I can arrange smaller loads. It is when they were doing the big stone blocks for bridges that the boiler blew out. Thus, we got the crane working, albeit about an hour later than it was supposed to. In the meanwhile, the workers had moved the gravel to ballast the line by wheelbarrow. With the crane lifting a shallow tray and gradually extending the boom away from the wagon it was on, the men could rake gravel out in a relatively smooth ribbon. Then they used big iron poles and pieces of railway tie to lift the rails slightly, while other workers poked at the 33 gravel with pikes to move it around and under the ties, filling any gaps so the line was well supported. While this was going on, I measured the length of the boom and the distance of the back of the crane platform from the boom bearing, the number of teeth in the gears, and various diameters, minimum and maximum, of the winches and so on. Also the approximate diameter of the cylinder. With these measurements, I retired to the edge of the right-of-way and sat on a boulder and did my calculations. It was clear that stones 3 by 2 by 2 feet would weigh nearly a ton at approximately 150 pounds per cubic foot density. We would need to add some counterweight to the back of the platform to be safe. And the engine, at the working pressure of about 45 pounds per square inch, would not lift them without a pulley to double the lifting force. And of course, that would halve the lifting speed. I wrote a note to Bellisle to ask for pulley blocks. We would need several, since the boom winch, as well as the hoist, would each need one, possibly two. And I suggested some extra cables and shackles that we could use to secure the angle of the boom once that was set by the boom winch. Going back to the crane, I checked that there were places such cables could be anchored. We would need the blacksmith to make some more rings on the platform. And I checked that the platform slew rotation could be anchored. If we put some holes in the crane platform and reinforced them, and similarly in the wagon deck, we could drop an iron pin or a rail spike through both holes to stop rotation. That would be quicker and likely more secure than ropes. The crane rode on a circular track on small roller wheels. There was a sort of brake that simply pushed a large block of wood against the deck of the wagon. That could be improved. There were holes for wooden bars like on a ship's capstan, so the crane could be rotated or slewed. That wasn't controlled with steam power as yet, and we could possibly rig one of the winches to do this. It rather depended on how often we needed to change the angle of the boom versus turning the crane left or right. All in all, the crane was clearly a patchwork catch, as catch can job, probably cobbled together out of available resources, as was much of our equipment. However, there was no reason we could not improve it, and that was my remit from Kiefer. After I finished the note to Bellisle, I wrote up a report to Kiefer, then copied it out for myself. I included my calculations as an appendix, keeping for myself the originals made with MacDonald, which were a bit untidy. I started my report with a quick summary of findings, a statement of my intent to add pulleys and counterweights and other improvements, and a recommendation that the cylinder be made more powerful or another be added when this was possible. By now it was late morning. I walked back to the railhead and found Joseph there, talking with the foreman of the supply party. Bellisle would not be coming out until Monday, so after discussion, it was decided that Joseph would go back with the supply train and return on Monday morning. He hinted that he had other matters that needed the attention of Kiefer, 34, or someone of similar authority. Having given Joseph my note for Belisol and my report for Kiefer, in addition to the note about the spikes he already had, I said, I wish you Godspeed, Joseph, and hope that you are not the messenger who is vilified for bringing bad news. I think not, Richard, as Kiefer has engaged us to find out things for him. Mind you, watch out for yourself. I would keep out of O'Reilly's way for a day or so until we have a decision on what Kiefer wants to do about things. It proved relatively easy to keep out of the way for the rest of the day. It was nearly noon, so I got some food from the cook at the railhead, then I walked back to our hut. There I gathered a spare shirt, socks, and underclothes, wrapped extra paper in oilcloth, and put all in my haversack in case I were out for one or more nights. I walked up the right-of-way to the stream, where there was no one about, but the canoe was tied to a loop of rope that went around tree branches on either side of the stream, so I could pull it over to my side of the water. Indeed, I did not need the paddle, but could haul myself over to the other side. I found the survey crew about 2 miles further up the right-of-way. Here they were actually doing a check on the original survey of the route, so the calculations were more complicated, and Shaw was glad to have me along. Quite sensibly, he chose to do the measurements, then he and one of the crew would work on the calculations, while I and another man carried out the same calculations. Mind you, watch how Mr. Carr does those check columns. They seem like a good idea, so we should learn the technique, he said. Over the course of the afternoon, Shaw and one of the 3 assistants worked with me, and over the next few days, I would work with each of the other 2 from time to time. At first, the assistants showed polite reluctance to have to learn the check columns. But at different points, when they caught errors and where some of my ways of organizing the calculations let them increase their speed in getting results, I noticed a grudging approval. Even by the Saturday afternoon, Shaw commented, I do believe we are doing the reckoning a bit quicker. Mr. Carr, and even if not quicker, I think we have fewer mistakes. That for me was a happy outcome. At the end of the day on that Saturday, which was about 5 o'clock rather than the normal dusk, to allow for some recreation, Shaw asked me, do you have plans to go with some of the workers to the tavern in Cornwall? 35. No, Mr. Shaw, I like wine or beer, but mainly with a meal and company, but I am not much for rowdy drinking, as I suspect will be the case in the tavern. Joseph Lefebvre made sure there was some bread and biscuits and some cheese and a couple of eggs in a tin-lined box. And we have some tea and a kettle. So I will make a simple meal and get an early night, then walk into Cornwall tomorrow and find a church and then explore the area a little. Well, if you would rather, you can come with me to Long Salt. My wife has family nearby there, and there should be a space in the barn if you are not too fussy. We go to the Holy Trinity Church, which is Church of England. I am not very religious, but the school I went to in England followed the Church of England. But will I not be an extra cost to you? If we see a chance to buy some extra food, that will certainly help, but there is always enough. Thus I came to walk with Shaw to the west about 5 or 6 miles. Along the way, we passed a house with the sign of a bakery. There was no outward indication of business, but Shaw knocked, and a woman came to the door. Shaw asked if there were any baked goods still for sale, and it turned out there were some remnants of the day's production. So I bought a loaf of bread and some small cakes with currants or raisins in them, which was practically all to be had. It would have to do as my contribution to the communal meals. I had a very pleasant evening with Shaw, his wife Mabel, her sister Joan, and her husband, Michael, and their children. They had a modest farm, but seemed to be prospering in a steady way. On the Sunday morning, we went to church, had an enjoyable lunch, and in the late afternoon, Shaw and I walked back to the railhead. This evening, I found no disturbance of the shed. I made a modest supper of bread and cheese and a couple of the small cakes from the bakery. They were a bit stale, but some tea helped wash them down. Then I arranged that the small window was a fraction open, but secured the door from the inside. I was nervous that my presence was a threat to someone and that they wanted me gone. As it turned out, I was not disturbed during the night except by insects. Canada seems to have a lot of them, though fortunately for the time of year there were but a few. Late Monday afternoon, after I had worked with them all day, I made my way back towards the railhead with the survey crew, and I was glad to see Joseph there. When we were returned to our hut, and sure nobody was in earshot, he said, "Kiefer was very pleased with your report on the crane. He has sent this letter, but told me it has nothing about the other matter. He plans to come to discuss that personally with you later in the week. In the meanwhile, we are to pretend nothing is amiss in that regard." I looked at the letter from Kiefer, 36, Montreal, 12th of May, 1855. Dear Carr, thank you for your clear and well-organized report on the steam crane. You have my wholehearted support for the improvements you suggest. Unfortunately, it may take some time to do anything about the engine power, but I am asking Belisol to investigate possibilities. It could be that a second, more powerful crane is worth acquiring and more economical in the long run. Yours, S. Joseph told me Kiefer would come on Thursday or Friday, as he had obligations before then. We were to tell nobody, as Kiefer would make it a surprise. In the meantime, Joseph was to carry a confidential package to Ottawa, which had only incorporated as a city on January 1st of the year, previously being called Bytown after Colonel John By, who built the Rideau Canal. My suspicions were that the package related to possible negotiations about links between the Grand Trunk and other railways, of which there were several lines either being built or considered. However, I did not ask Joseph anything about this, simply when he would likely return, which was late Thursday. He also told me that Kiefer wanted me to meet Belisol on Tuesday and or Wednesday when he came up with the supply train in case there were messages for me. For the rest of the week, I worked when I could with the survey crew. It was work I liked, and I found that my interaction with my colleagues was cordial. By Thursday morning, the rails had reached the small stream. They had not been ballasted yet, but at a slow pace, the steam crane could be brought up and used to aid the building of the bridge. There were drawings showing stone abutments and a pair of iron girders about 30 feet in length. However, initially we would build a bridge of wooden beams braced by similar beams angling down to the bank and fastened to piles. We would use the steam winch with a crude pile driver made on site from a pair of beams that we would grease and fit with a sliding hammerhead filled with stones. The driver would be supported and positioned using cross beams fastened to it and staked into the ground with large pins like huge tent pegs. Though we could not move the crane to the west side of the stream, we could run a line to the driver so we could haul up the weight and let it drop with one of the winches. On that side of the stream, we could not, unfortunately, use the crane to position the driver quickly, but would have to drag and heave instead. Once the wooden bridge was in place, we could use it to move materials into place and drive piles for cofferdams to build the stone abutments. Eventually, the rails would be 37 moved over to the new bridge and the wooden one dismantled. Indeed, the wooden beams would be reused for a similar job later on. Though I was working with the survey crew if they were not too far up the right-of-way, I made sure to meet the supply train on both Tuesday and Wednesday. Belisol on these occasions had given me copies of the loading inventories for these and some previous few days. In the evenings, I would review these and estimate any differences between the deliveries and track laid. Material seemed to be evaporating, as we suspected. The survey crew were on hand on Thursday morning to put in stakes where we would drive piles to support the beams for the temporary bridge deck and supports, and to set the angle for some of the latter, since they would be driven into the bank. Already by 10 o'clock, 4 pointed logs had been driven to the level needed to lay the deck, and the driver was being repositioned. I was on the west side of the stream, but was needed to measure from the east side to get a good line of sight. Adam and I were in the canoe and about halfway across when I noticed O'Reilly on the crane platform, and the driver beams were leaning outward from the shore. Fortunately, our rope to tug the canoe across had been in the way of the temporary bridge, and the shrubs we used to hold it had been cut away. Thus, Adam and I were paddling, a skill still new to me, though I was improving and rather enjoyed the way the canoe moved across calm water. Suddenly, as I watched, O'Reilly hit the winch brake release with the back of a hatchet kept on the crane in case a line needed to be cut. Adam, Left exclamation mark, I yelled and dug in my paddle to push the nose of the canoe away from the likely arc of the falling beams. The driver beams pivoted out from the shore and fell towards us as we were moving away from them. We almost escaped harm, but the very top of one driver beam just caught the gunwale of the canoe a few inches behind Adam, who was in the front of the canoe. It smashed this and sliced through the birch bark and ribbing. Before we knew it, we were in the water, which was about 6 feet deep. Though never a great one for swimming, I did know how and made for the eastern shore. It seemed Adam also knew how to swim, and we struggled up the bank, dripping as a couple of the men came down to help us. Are you all right, Adam? I think that something is wrong with my wrist. The beams hit my paddle. He was holding his left wrist awkwardly. Might be broken if the paddle came up fast as the beam hit the boat, said one of the men. Did anyone see what happened? I asked. Adam looked uncomfortable, then said, I think someone released the brake on the winch. 38. From the other side of the stream, Shaw yelled, I saw you, O'Reilly. That was deliberate, and I will testify in court if I have to. Then Adam said, yes, that is what I saw, but nobody believes a Mohawk. Since I saw it too, which is why I called out, I believe you, I said. I didn't see, but I believe you too, the other man helping us out of the water said quietly. O'Reilly was now at the top of the bank. It was an accident. That winch is always breaking down, he shouted. Then why is that hatchet in your hand? I asked. Other workers were gathering round now, and there was some murmuring. There was nothing wrong with that brake, McDonald shouted, and I would have been beside it if O'Reilly hadn't told me to put more wood in the boiler and pump in more water for steam. I think someone had better accompany Adam to Cornwall to see if there is a doctor there to examine his wrist and to ask the sheriff to come and take statements, I said. Maybe better to settle things here and now, said a loud voice. I have had enough of O'Reilly's funny business. You want to take me on, McIsaac? Yelled O'Reilly, holding up the hatchet in a threatening way to the man who had called out. O'Reilly, put down the hatchet, and we will all wait for the sheriff and keep to the law, I said loudly. Actually, I was convinced there would be no calm outcome, but was unprepared for what actually did happen. O'Reilly turned and ran eastwards down the side of the track. As he did, I saw that there was a saddled horse tied to a bush a couple of 100 yards away. A couple of men started to follow him tentatively, but clearly were wary of the hatchet and possibly some other weapon. Then McIsaac picked up a long prying bar, which the men used to lift and joggle the ties when ballasting. This he ran with and tossed like a javelin. He must have been strong, as it went the 20 yards or so to O'Reilly and a bit beyond. However, either the aim was bad, or McIsaac simply wanted to scare O'Reilly into stopping, as it went into the ground to the left of the line, a couple of yards in front and to the left of the running man. This startled O'Reilly, and he moved to the right and stumbled over the rail, tripped, then fell across the track at an angle. There was a loud clunk as his head hit the far rail, and he lay still. Men walked up to him cautiously. I followed them. When we got to him, it was clear. 39, he had suffered a bad injury as there was blood on the rail. His eyes were wide open. After a few seconds, I bent over and felt for a pulse at his neck. There was none. Well, we will need the sheriff for sure now, but to act as the coroner. Who will go with Adam to Cornwall? I will, said a man who I recalled was named Jamieson. I know where the office is, and the sheriff will know where to find a doctor or how to telegraph for one, or else someone who knows about bones. All right, Jamieson, isn't it? Yes, Mr. Carr. In the meantime, I will write down a statement from each of the rest of you and from myself. But we would better leave O'Reilly where he is until the sheriff has seen him. Can someone make sure that nothing comes down the track? I will put some ties on the track a couple of 100 yards up, said one of the men, as Jamieson and Adams started up the track. Perhaps I should make myself scarce, said McIsaac. I can't stop you, I said. But I think the truth is that O'Reilly tried to do harm to Adam and me, and the rest of you tried to apprehend him until it could be determined if his actions were deliberate. When he tried to leave, he tripped. The bar you threw did not hit him. It was well away. See where it is lying. Does anyone have a different view of what happened? Seems he got what he deserved, said another man. All right, then. Can a couple of you get the canoe out of the water, along with anything that was in it, including the paddles? They will be evidence of how the driver beams fell, but we should leave the beams there until the sheriff has seen them. As I said, we should write down a statement from each of us, and I will witness the signatures, and I will take down the statements for those who cannot write. Leave everything here untouched for now, except for the canoe, and work on bringing up materials for the bridge when your statements are done. This we did, and given the writing skills of the men, it took about 2 hours, and then the sheriff came up on a horse, shortly followed by Kiefer on foot from the train that had arrived. My God, Carr, what has been going on here? He asked, even though I was engaged in giving the sheriff the statements. They were in pencil, given that we did not generally have pen and ink on the worksite. 40. Hello, mister. Kiefer, the sheriff said. There's been an accident, and O'Reilly tripped and hit his head on the rail and is dead. One of your Mohawk boys was injured and is being looked at by the fellow in Cornwall who sets bones. After about a quarter of an hour, the story had been repeated, the statements read and understood, and the sheriff said, well, it looks like O'Reilly released the winch brake, seemingly as a deliberate action for which, at the moment, the motive is not known, and as the workers tried to apprehend him, he tripped and died from hitting his head on a rail. Nobody appears to have pushed him or hit him. I will write the report and file it in my role as coroner with the statements. Thank you, Mr. Carr, for keeping the site untouched. The body can be removed and you can remedy the damage to the equipment. I will, however, want the statements of the Mohawk boy and the man who took him to Cornwall. I have already told them that. May I ask you, Mr. Carr, to arrange that I receive their statements? To this I agreed. Kiefer asked for volunteers to remove O'Reilly's body, and 2 men agreed. The sheriff was asked who served as undertaker and gave instructions on how to find him. Kiefer also asked who knew how to contact O'Reilly's family, and this question got no response. I will put in train inquiries, Kiefer announced. For the moment, I will put Mr. Carr in charge while we decide who will be the foreman here. Come, Mr. Carr, we have much to discuss, and it is past the time of the midday meal. Kiefer and I walked back to the supply train and climbed into the brake wagon where we found some food. Kiefer gave the brakeman a note and asked him to get it telegraphed to Matt. That was to ask if there is information on O'Reilly, but also to remove any ears that may hear our conversation. Now, I was very pleased with your report on the steam crane, and I have started inquiries where we may get a more powerful engine or winch, or indeed a complete crane. However, that will take time, so go ahead with the blocks and other improvements you see fit to make. I hope that the incident today has not done damage, but it will be repairable, simply occasion delay. Yes, we always seem to get delays. However, to the other matter of the missing materials. Bellisle has confirmed your estimates as he had his own that are very similar. Unfortunately, O'Reilly seems the likely culprit, and we now cannot interrogate him. Have you any idea who his accomplices may be? Unfortunately not. I have been working mainly with the survey crew, so I have not had time to become familiar with the workers. There are a lot of them, and Joseph has said O'Reilly may have demanded bribes to get and maintain their employment, so some may have been encouraged to help him. Or he may have simply engaged men who were already involved in his scheme. 41. Yes, that is the conundrum. And from what happened today, they are not above violence. Since I need you to undertake other tasks, and we have no idea who might have been working with O'Reilly, I think we had better bring a foreman from outside. I had already been considering this, and asked Bellisle if he has any recommendations, and he said he thought there was one man in the depot who could be suitable, but I wish to interview him myself first. That would be most sensible, Mr. Kiefer. And shall I continue to work with the survey crew and watch for improvements of the equipment or working methods? Normally, I would say yes. However, your good work and the way you seem to get on with folk have given me another idea. By the way, I had a note from Shaw. Said at first he worried you might be a clever, bookish fellow, but found you were friendly and helpful, and the tricks you taught them have made the work more efficient. Well done. I am most grateful to Mr. Shaw. He was also very hospitable last weekend in inviting me to his sister-in-law's farm. Now, Carr, because you seem to have an eye for how things may be improved, I think I will have you get an overview of the Grand Trunk's undertaking in this line from Montreal to Toronto, then have a look at what is happening between Kingston, Ottawa, and Montreal. It will mean walking a good part of the right-of-way. I would like you to look at the track laid and similar matters on our own works, and the Rideau Canal, and the Prescott to Bytown, and then the Carillon to Grenville. That is a big assignment. I thank you for your confidence in me. You have shown ability, young man. Now here is some money to finance this work. I want you to leave as soon as a new foreman has had at least a full day with you to learn what he needs to know. More time if you feel necessary. That is no problem, Mr. Kiefer, but I wonder if I may need some measuring equipment with me, such as a chain and compass. Of course, I had thought you might take someone as an assistant, but not Mr. Lefebvre. I need him to continue the investigation of the missing materials, and he's very good at quietly finding out things. Yes, Joseph is most capable. Then perhaps if his injury is not severe, I might take Adam Brandt. He has been assisting the survey crew, but will likely not be able to do much work with a broken arm or wrist. However, he should be able to lead a pack horse or hold the end of a measuring chain. And I believe he knows the country. I would not like him to lose his job because of O'Reilly's wickedness. 42. That is acceptable to me, though you may find some people have a dark view of the Indians and be unwilling to help you or offer you accommodation or services with him as your servant. I will accept that risk. As we will be walking the right-of-way, I will take a tent and sleeping blankets. Now, do you wish me to receipt the money? That would be proper, and I thank you for suggesting it. And you should count it. I have put in some of our own notes, as currency is still in short supply here in the province, and a mishmash of sterling and the new decimal coins. You had better count what is in the pouch while I eat my lunch, for I have to be away soon. There were a couple of meat pies and bottles of beer, and Kiefer set to eating while I looked at the money, which, indeed, was a motley collection of different coinage and notes, including the private notes of the Grand Trunk, which were redeemable at the Bank of Matt. Such was the shortage of coin and bills that businesses issued their own. Some merchants even gave higher value at their own establishment to encourage loyalty of custom. I copied the list of amounts and noted it received our car and the date and gave this to Kiefer, who said, "You probably saw the note that instructs Grand Trunk employees to supply you with equipment or services as you need, and that you will give them a receipt. I have added that they may telegraph to me if they require confirmation, but I have already sent word to several people that you will be coming along in due course. Of course, you will be more or less on your own up to Ottawa, and you will need to go back and forth to see both the Rideau Canal and the Bytown to Prescott, and look over where there is a proposed railway between Brockville and the Ottawa River upstream of Bytown. It was an impressive assignment, and in hindsight, I believe that I did it justice, in the journey learning a great deal about Upper Canada, and from young Adam Brandt, a view of the world very different from that of the colonials. I also learned about black fly and mosquitoes and some of the native methods of trying to deal with these nuisances, though truly they are one of the worst aspects of the Canadas. Coming home to Montreal from Ottawa on the steamboats and Carillon to Grenville Railway, I learned that expansion of that line was unlikely, in that one of its principals, James Sykes, had been lost on the SS Arctic disaster in September 1854, taking with him a large sum of money raised for the railway in England. So much in life hangs, like O'Reilly's life, on a thread of circumstance.